The Pale Reach was where you went when the world wanted to forget you existed. And for 7 years, Izor had walked its cursed sands alone, the last guardian of a shore no living soul was permitted to touch. She had stopped counting the sunrises. She had stopped hoping anyone would come. Why would they? The ancient treaty was absolute. Set foot on the Pale Reach, and the sea spirits would claim your soul before your next breath. So the kingdom whispered, what crime could be so terrible that exile to forbidden sand was considered mercy? They weren't wrong to wonder. Beneath her weathered cloak lay her shame. The spiral brand burned into her shoulder blade, marking her as a storm witch who had killed with lightning. A murderer, a monster. Sentenced to guard the boundary between land and sea until the tides finally swallowed her whole. She would not be rescued. She would not be remembered. She had made peace with that. Then the Alpha King came, Calum of Ravenmore, cold as the eternal winter slowly choking his kingdom to death, walked across the forbidden boundary without hesitation and stopped directly before her. Come with me, he said. The waves themselves seemed to hold their breath. Why would a king who had written these laws into blood and stone break them for the one woman the world had already buried? Isor didn't understand. Not until he made his terms clear. He would pardon her crimes, protect her from those who'd condemned her, give her everything she needed to survive. He would even swear never to claim her as his mate, but only under one condition. She must save his dying kingdom and never reveal what she truly was. Neither of them understood how unthinkable that bargain would become. The morning mist clung to the Pale Reach like a mourning veil draped over a corpse. Isor stood at the water's edge, bare feet buried in sand so white it looked like crushed bone. The cold didn't bother her anymore. Nothing did. 7 years of solitude had stripped away everything soft. The girl who had once worn silk gowns and danced at summer balls was gone. In her place stood something harder, leaner, and forged by salt wind and silence into a creature that barely remembered how to speak. Her routine never changed. Wake before dawn, walk the boundary stones, check that the ward still held, gather whatever the tide brought in, driftwood for fire, shells she could trade with the supply boat that came once a month, fish if she was lucky, then wait. Always waiting. The supply boat was her only contact with the living world. An old beta named Korik, who never looked her in the eye, who left crates of dried meat and grain on the rocks at the boundary line and retreated before she could reach them. As if her exile was contagious. As if standing too close might curse him too. She didn't blame him. The spiral brand on her shoulder blade itched beneath her tunic, a permanent reminder of what she was. Storm Witch. The rarest and most dangerous of elemental wolves. Her magic lived in lightning, in thunder, in the raw fury of tempests. It had manifested when she was 16, wild and uncontrollable, and her family had hidden it desperately. Until the night Brennan died. Isor closed her eyes against the memory, but it came anyway. Her betrothed, Lord Brennan of Ashford, charred beyond recognition in his own bedchamber. Lightning scorch marks on the walls. And she, standing in the doorway, her hands still crackling with static she couldn't remember summoning. She hadn't killed him. She knew that in her bones, but she couldn't prove it. Her magic had been unbound that night, raging through her dreams while she slept, and when she'd woken to screams. Her uncle Morkant had been waiting, ready with chains, ready with accusations, ready to finally destroy the niece whose inheritance he had always coveted. Murderer! Her cousin Thessaly had screamed, tears streaming down her face. You killed him because he was going to leave you for me. The trial had lasted 3 days. The verdict was exile, not execution, only because no one wanted to risk her death curse. Storm witches were said to bring catastrophic weather upon whoever killed them, so they'd sent her here instead. To the Pale Reach, the one stretch of coastline in all of Ravenmore where no wolf could legally tread, protected by an ancient treaty with the sea spirits that predated the kingdom itself. Her punishment was to guard the boundary, to ensure no foolish mortal crossed into sacred waters. Her punishment was to be forgotten. Isor opened her eyes and stared at the horizon. The sky was heavy today, iron gray and restless. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, responding to the distant pressure of a storm building somewhere far out to sea. That's when she saw it. A ship. Her heart stuttered. The monthly supply wasn't due for another 2 weeks, and no other vessel would dare approach the Pale Reach. The treaty forbade it. The king's law forbade it. Yet there it was. Black sails against the gray sky, cutting through the waves with terrifying speed, heading directly for her shore. Isor's breath caught as the ship dropped anchor beyond the reef. A smaller boat was lowered, rowed by 4 massive wolves whose scents she could taste even from this distance. Soldiers, alphas, and something else. Something that made her wolf flatten in instinctive submission. A king's dominance. The boat scraped against the sand 50 yards down the beach, well within forbidden territory. The soldiers remained aboard, but one figure stepped onto the Pale Reach without hesitation. He was tall, impossibly so, with hair the color of a winter moon and eyes like pale blue ice. Even from this distance she could feel the cold radiating from him, unnatural for a wolf, wrong in ways that made her magic prickle with warning. But it was his scent that stopped her heart. Frost and iron, power and command. And beneath it, buried so deep she almost missed it, the faint bitter trace of something dying. The Alpha King of Ravenmore had just broken his own sacred law, and he was walking directly toward her. Isor didn't run. There was nowhere to go. The Pale Reach stretched for miles in either direction, nothing but empty sand and hungry sea. And even if she could escape, where would she flee? Back to the kingdom that had condemned her? Into the forbidden waters where the spirits would drown her within minutes? So she stood her ground and watched the Alpha King approach. Up close, he was even more devastating. Cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, a jaw that looked carved from marble. He moved with the controlled grace of a predator who had never needed to hurry because nothing had ever been foolish enough to flee from him. But something was wrong. His lips held a faint blue tinge. His skin, though flawless, was too pale, almost translucent. And when he stopped 3 feet from her, she could see the frost crystals forming on his collar, his shoulders, and his hair. He was freezing from the inside out. "You are Isor of House Velmaris," he said. Not a question. His voice matched the rest of him, cold, controlled, empty of warmth. "I was," Isor replied, surprised her voice still worked after years of disuse. "House Velmaris was dissolved after my exile. The title, the lands, everything went to my uncle." "I'm aware." The king studied her with those ice-pale eyes. "I'm also aware of what you are." Her blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't insult us both." He stepped closer, and the temperature dropped so sharply she could see her own breath. Storm Witch, the only one left in all of Ravenmore. Perhaps the only one left anywhere. Isor's hand moved instinctively to her shoulder, covering the brand beneath her tunic. "That magic is bound, sealed when I was exiled. I couldn't summon a spark if I tried." "I know." Something flickered behind his frozen gaze. "I need it unbound." The words hung between them, inconceivable and terrifying. "You've gone mad," Isor breathed. "I was convicted of murder. My magic killed a man, and you want to set it free?" "I want you to save my kingdom." She stared at him, searching for mockery, for cruelty, for any sign that this was some elaborate trap. But his scent held no deception. Just that bone-deep cold and the bitter undertone of decay. "Ravenmore is dying," the king continued flatly. 3 years ago, an eternal winter descended on the land. Crops fail, rivers freeze, wolves are starving in the streets. He paused, and for just a moment she saw something crack behind his composure. The cold comes from me. Isor's eyes widened. From you? A curse, passed through my bloodline for generations. He turned slightly, and she noticed the frost spreading down his arms, crystallizing on his knuckles. It worsens every year. The royal mages believe that if I don't find a way to break it soon, the winter will become permanent. Ravenmore will become a frozen wasteland, and everyone in it will die. And you think I can help? Isor shook her head. I'm no healer. My magic destroys. It doesn't save. Lightning melts ice. His gaze locked onto hers. Storm magic is the only elemental force strong enough to counter what's killing me. The mages have searched for 7 years. You're the only storm witch left. 7 years. The same amount of time she'd been rotting on this shore. You knew where I was, she realized slowly. This whole time. You could have come sooner. I hope to find another way. For the first time, something human flickered across his frozen features. I didn't want to need you. The honesty of it startled her. What exactly are you proposing? She asked carefully. Come back to Ravenmore with me. Let the royal mages unbind your magic. Work with them to find a way to break my curse. He paused. In exchange, I will pardon your conviction, restore your name, protect you from anyone who would see you punished for what they believe you did. Isor's heart hammered against her ribs. Freedom. After 7 years of exile, he was offering her freedom. There's a condition, the king added, his voice hardening. No one can know what you are. Storm witches are feared even more than the curse killing my land. If the court discovers I've brought one into the palace, they will demand your execution, and I may not be able to stop them. So I would be your secret weapon. You would be my last hope. He extended his hand, and she saw ice crackling across his palm. Do we have a bargain, Isor of House Vilmaris? She should refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that kings didn't rescue exiled murderers out of kindness, and that there was something he wasn't telling her. But then she looked past him at the endless gray sea, at the shore that had been her prison for 7 years, at the life that wasn't really a life at all. And she took his hand. The cold of his touch burned like fire. The journey to Ravenmore took 3 days by ship, then another 2 by carriage through frozen countryside that made Azor's chest ache. The king hadn't exaggerated. Everything was dying. Snow-blanketed fields that should have been green with summer wheat. Rivers ran sluggish and gray, choked with ice even in what should have been the warmest season. The villages they passed were husks of what they had once been, windows dark, chimneys cold, the few wolves she glimpsed thin and hollow-eyed. And the closer they got to the capital, the worse it became. How long do they have? Isor asked quietly, watching a pack of pups huddled around a meager fire outside a crumbling farmhouse. Months. King Calum didn't look away from the window. Perhaps less. He'd barely spoken since they'd left the Pale Reach. He sat across from her in the carriage, wrapped in furs that did nothing to stop the frost perpetually forming on his skin. His scent had grown sharper, more bitter, the decay beneath his power becoming harder to ignore. Whatever curse was killing him was accelerating. The mages you mentioned, Isor ventured. They've truly found nothing that helps. They've tried everything. Potions, rituals, elemental transfers. His jaw tightened. 3 of them died attempting a direct magical intervention. The curse doesn't merely resist. It punishes. And you think my storm magic will be different? I think lightning is chaos. He turned to look at her, and she was struck again by how beautiful he was, and how tragic. The curse operates through order, through control. It freezes everything in place, prevents change, and prevents warmth. A ghost of something that might have been hope crossed his features. Perhaps what it needs is something that can't be controlled. Something that can't be controlled. The exact words her uncle had used when demanding her exile. The capital city of Ashenmere rose before them as the sun began to set, though sun was generous. The sky hadn't been anything but gray in years, according to the driver. The palace sat at the city's heart, a sprawling structure of black stone and silver spires that should have been magnificent but, instead, looked like a beautiful corpse. Guards snapped to attention as the carriage passed through the gates. Servants rushed forward, then stumbled back when they caught their king's scent, fear flickering across their faces. "They're afraid of you," Isor murmured. "They're afraid of what I carry." Caleb stepped out of the carriage and offered her his hand. As they should be. She took it, that burning cold racing up her arm, and stepped onto the frozen cobblestones of her new prison. Because that's what this was, she reminded herself. A different cage. A gilded one, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. "The woman will need chambers," Caleb announced to a waiting steward. "The east wing, near the mage tower." "And how shall we introduce her, your majesty?" The steward's gaze slid over Isor with barely concealed curiosity. "Lady Varen," the lie came smoothly. "A distant relation from the northern provinces. She'll be assisting with research into the curse." Lady Varen. Not her name, not her history. Just another layer of concealment wrapped around the truth. The steward bowed and led her away before she could respond. The corridors were vast and echoing, lined with portraits of former kings and queens whose frozen gazes seemed to follow her every step. Frost crept along the ceiling corners, along the window frames, along every surface the staff hadn't scrubbed in the last hour. Her chambers were larger than her entire dwelling on the Pale Reach had been. A massive bed draped in velvet. A fireplace that roared with flames, yet produced barely any warmth. Windows overlooking a courtyard garden that had become a sculpture of ice. "Dinner will be served in your rooms tonight, my lady." The steward bowed again. "The king requests you rest. Tomorrow, the mages will begin their work." Then she was alone. Isor stood in the center of the room, surrounded by luxury she hadn't seen in 7 years, and felt more trapped than she ever had on the empty shore. A knock at the door made her spin. It wasn't the steward who entered. It was a woman, tall and elegant, with auburn hair piled in elaborate curls, and a gown that cost more than most families earned in a year. Her scent was sharp and floral, omega with noble breeding, and her smile didn't reach her calculating eyes. "So you're the mysterious expert the king dragged back from the edges of nowhere." The woman circled her slowly, examining her like livestock. "Funny, you don't look like a mage." "I'm not," Isor said carefully. "Just a researcher. Old texts, forgotten remedies, that sort of thing." The woman stopped before her. "I'm Lady Ravenna of House Blackthorn, the king's intended." Isor's heart stumbled. "His intended?" "Our betrothal was arranged years ago, before this unfortunate curse made the actual wedding complicated." Ravenna's smile sharpened. "I've waited very patiently, Lady Varen, so I do hope whatever research you're here to conduct will be conducted quickly." The threat beneath the silk was unmistakable. "I want nothing from the king," Isor said quietly, "only to help, and then to leave." "Good." Ravenna leaned closer, her omega scent cloying, suffocating. "Because I've seen the way cursed men grasp at hope, and I've seen the women who become that hope get destroyed when they fail to deliver." She swept out without another word. Isor stood frozen, her mind racing. A betrothal, a jealous noblewoman, a court full of secrets and schemes she didn't understand, and somewhere in this frozen palace, a king whose curse was killing him slowly, who had broken his own laws to bring her here, who looked at her with eyes full of desperate hope he was trying very hard to hide. What have I walked into? The fire crackled, but the cold crept closer. The mage tower smelled of old paper and desperation. Isor followed the narrow stone staircase upward, her escort a silent beta servant who hadn't spoken a single word since collecting her at dawn. The walls were lined with frost despite the torches burning every few feet. The cold deepened with every step, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. At the top, a heavy oak door swung open to reveal a circular chamber cluttered with instruments she didn't recognize, crystal spheres, bronze mechanisms covered in runes, shelves overflowing with bottles of things that glowed and pulsed and occasionally screamed. 3 figures turned at her entrance. Ah, the mysterious Lady Varenne. The eldest mage, a wizened alpha with a beard that reached his waist, shuffled forward. I am Aldrich, Chief Arcane Advisor to the Crown. These are my colleagues, Seren and Maddox. Seren was a sharp-featured Omega woman whose silver hair was cropped close to her skull. Maddox was younger, a beta with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes that kept darting to the door as if expecting something terrible to burst through. The king told us what you are, Aldrich continued, his voice dropping. Storm-touched, the last of your kind. Isor's shoulders tensed. He said no one would know. We are exceptions. Aldrich gestured to a chair surrounded by more crystalline instruments. We cannot help you unbind your magic if we don't know what we're unbinding. Sit, please. Let us see what we're working with. The examination took hours. They poked and prodded at her with magical implements she didn't understand. They made her drink foul potions that tasted like burnt copper. They chanted in languages older than the kingdom itself while running glowing fingers along the spiral brand on her shoulder blade. Through it all, Isor gritted her teeth and endured. Fascinating, Aldrich murmured finally, studying a crystal that had turned storm gray in his palm. The binding is masterwork. Whoever sealed your powers knew exactly what they were containing. My uncle hired the best, Isor said bitterly. Indeed. This will take time to unravel safely. Aldrich set down the crystal. Days, perhaps weeks. We cannot simply shatter the seal, or the resulting surge could kill you and everyone within a mile radius. Weeks. While the kingdom froze, while the king's curse worsened. Is there nothing faster? She asked. Faster risks catastrophe. Seren's voice was clipped, clinical. Your magic is not some gentle stream to be redirected. It is a hurricane trapped in a bottle. We must ease the cork out slowly, or the explosion will destroy us all. The door opened behind them. Isor turned to find King Calum standing in the doorway, and her breath caught despite herself. He looked worse than yesterday. The frost had crept higher up his throat, crystallizing along his jaw. His lips were almost fully blue now, and his movements held a stiffness that spoke of joints slowly freezing from within. Progress? He asked. The binding is more complex than anticipated, Your Majesty. Aldrich bowed low. We will need time. Time. The word came out flat, empty. How much? 3 weeks. Perhaps 4. Pain surfaced briefly in those ice-pale eyes, then vanished just as quickly. Very well. Do what you must. He turned to leave, but swayed suddenly, catching himself on the doorframe. Isor was moving before she realized it, her hand closing around his arm to steady him. The cold of his skin burned through his sleeve. Your Majesty, she breathed. I'm fine. But he didn't pull away. For one long moment he simply stood there, her hand on his arm, his breath visible in the frigid air between them. The cold spells come and go. I've learned to manage them. You're freezing to death, Isor said quietly. That's not something to manage. His gaze dropped to her hand, still gripping his arm. You should let go. Extended contact accelerates the spread. I don't feel cold. It was true. Where her fingers touched him, warmth was seeping from her skin into his. She could feel it, a gentle current flowing outward, and where it touched the frost on his sleeve, the ice began to melt. Caleb went very still. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "I don't know." Isor stared at the spreading circle of warmth. "My magic is bound. I shouldn't be able to. Storm witches carry heat in their blood." Aldrich had moved closer, his eyes wide with fascination. "Even bound, some residual warmth remains. It appears proximity to you provides the king with temporary relief." Temporary relief? Such clinical words for the way Caleb was looking at her now, with something raw and desperate bleeding through his frozen composure. "How temporary?" he asked, his voice rough. "Unknown, Your Majesty. We would need to study the interaction further." Aldrich's gaze sharpened with academic interest. "Perhaps Lady Varenne could attend you during the evenings, monitor the effects of sustained proximity." Sustained proximity. Evenings. Heat flooded Isor's cheeks that had nothing to do with her storm-touched blood. "That won't be necessary," she said quickly. "It might be." Caleb's hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his arm. The frost retreated further. "If your presence slows the curse, even slightly, it buys us time we desperately need. Your betrothed won't approve." Something dark flickered across his features. "Lady Ravenna's approval is not required." Before Isor could respond, he released her hand and stepped back. The cold rushed in immediately, frost beginning to reform on his sleeve. "I'll send for you tonight," he said, "after the court retires." Then he was gone. Isor stood frozen, her hand still tingling with phantom warmth, while three mages stared at her with expressions ranging from fascination to concern. "Well," Seren said dryly, "that's certainly a complication." The summons came at midnight. Isor followed a silent servant through corridors she was beginning to recognize, past the great hall where courtiers had whispered behind their hands as she'd entered for dinner, past Lady Ravenna's chambers where light still glowed beneath the door, past frozen gardens and frost-covered portraits until they reached the king's private wing. The servant bowed and retreated, leaving her alone before a massive door carved with the royal crest. She knocked. "Enter." The king's chambers were warmer than anywhere else she'd been in the palace, though warm was relative. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand in. Thick furs covered every surface. Candles burned in clusters, their flames fighting valiantly against the cold that seeped from the room's occupant. Caleb sat in a chair by the fire, his shirt unlaced at the throat, his hair loose around his shoulders. Without the formal armor of court dress, he looked younger, more vulnerable, and worse. The frost had spread across his collarbones, climbing toward his throat like crystalline fingers reaching for his pulse. "Close the door," he said. Isor obeyed, then stood awkwardly in the center of the room. The mages said proximity. They didn't specify what that meant exactly. "No." He rose slowly, and she saw him wince at the movement. "I suppose they left that for us to determine." He crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could see the ice crystals forming on his eyelashes. This close, his scent was overwhelming, frost and iron and that bitter undertone of decay, but beneath it all, something warmer. Something that made her wolf stir with confused interest. "I should explain," Caleb said quietly, "why I chose you. Why I broke my own laws to reach you. Because I'm the only storm witch left. Partly." He reached up, and she held her breath as his cold fingers brushed her cheek. "But also because when my spies described the woman exiled to the Pale Reach, they spoke of someone who had survived 7 years of solitude without breaking. Someone who tended her prison like a home. Someone who still walked the boundary stones every morning, still honored her duty, even though no one would ever know or care." His thumb traced her cheekbone, leaving a trail of frost that melted almost immediately against her warmth. "You should have grown bitter," he continued. "Cruel, mad even. But the report said you fed injured seabirds, sang to the waves at sunset. built little monuments from shells for no reason except that beauty matters, even in exile. Isor's throat tightened. No one had watched her in 7 years. She'd thought herself completely forgotten. But someone had seen. Someone had reported. And this frozen king had listened. "You didn't deserve your punishment," Calum said. "I read the trial records. The evidence was circumstantial at best, manufactured at worst. Your uncle wanted you destroyed, and he nearly succeeded." His jaw tightened. "If I survive this, I intend to investigate. Justice should have meaning, even for the powerless." She couldn't speak. The unexpected kindness cracked something open in her chest, something she'd kept locked away for years. "I didn't ask to come here to discuss justice," she managed finally. "No." His hand dropped from her face. "You came because my curse is killing me, and your warmth seems to slow it. Then tell me what you need." He studied her for a long moment, something conflicted warring behind his frozen features. Then he turned and walked to the bed, sitting on its edge with careful movements. "Just stay close," he said. "That's all." Isor crossed the room and sat beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. The effect was immediate. The frost on his neck began to recede. His breathing eased. The rigid tension in his spine softened slightly. "Better?" she asked. "Yes." He let out a breath that clouded in the air. "Much better." They sat in silence for a long while. The fire crackled. The candles flickered. Slowly, the king's head drooped, his exhaustion overwhelming his control. When he slumped against her shoulder, Isor didn't move. She sat perfectly still, this frozen king breathing against her neck, his ice-cold body slowly warming where it pressed against hers. Her wolf should have been terrified. Instead, it curled contentedly in her chest, satisfied in a way she couldn't explain. "This is dangerous," she thought distantly. "This is how attachment forms." But she didn't pull away. Hours later, she woke to find them lying tangled together on the bed, fully clothed but intertwined. His arm was wrapped around her waist, his face buried in her hair, his breathing deep and even. And his skin, where it pressed against hers, was warm. Truly warm, for the first time since she'd met him. Isor lay frozen, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had taken hold. Her fingers found his hand, resting against her stomach, and she traced the lines of his palm. No frost, no ice. Just skin, pale but living, warm but not burning. "What is happening?" she thought. As if hearing the question, Calum stirred against her. His arm tightened around her waist. His lips brushed the curve of her neck, and she felt him inhale deeply, scenting her. "You smell like summer storms," he murmured, still half asleep. "Like rain on hot stone." Her heart hammered. "You should probably let go." Probably. But he didn't move. If anything, he pulled her closer. In a moment. The moment stretched into minutes. Minutes into an hour. And when he finally released her, rising to dress for court, something had shifted between them that neither acknowledged. But that night, when his servant came to summon her again, Isor didn't hesitate. And the night after that. And the night after that. Each evening, she came to his chambers. Each night they talked until exhaustion claimed them. Each morning she woke wrapped in his arms, his skin warm against hers, the frost retreating a little further each time. She learned that he hated formal dinners but loved the night sky, that he'd wanted to be a scholar before duty claimed him, that he read poetry in secret because a king wasn't supposed to care about beautiful words. He learned that she missed her mother desperately, that she'd once dreamed of traveling to distant lands, that she still remembered every constellation her father had taught her before he died. They never crossed the line into true intimacy. He never claimed her, never even kissed her properly. The bargain between them remained technically intact. but something was building, something neither of them could name. Until the morning Isor woke alone, the space beside her cold and empty, and found Calum collapsed on the floor by the window. His skin was blue, his lips were cracked. Ice covered his body in thick sheets, spreading faster than she'd ever seen. And his eyes, when they opened, were filled with terror. "It knows," he gasped. "The curse knows what I feel for you, and it's punishing me." "Help!" Isor screamed, her voice shattering the morning silence. "Someone help me." She dropped to her knees beside Calum, her hands finding his face, his chest, anywhere she could touch. The cold that met her palms was beyond anything she'd felt before, so intense it burned, so deep it seemed to radiate from his very bones. But she didn't let go. "Stay with me," she begged. "Calum, please, stay with me." His hand found hers, gripping weakly. Ice crackled across his knuckles where they touched. "You need to understand," he whispered, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Before I can't speak anymore. Don't talk, save your strength. There's no point." A bitter laugh escaped him, turning into a cough that shook his entire frame. "This was always going to happen. I hoped I'd have more time." The door burst open. Servants flooded in, followed by Aldrich and the other mages, their faces going white when they saw their king. "Everyone out," Isor commanded, surprised by the authority in her own voice. "Except the mages. Now." They obeyed without question. The power of an alpha command, even from a disgraced exile, even from a bound storm witch, was enough to move them. Aldrich knelt beside her, his gnarled hands hovering over Calum's frozen form. "The curse has accelerated dramatically. Something triggered it." "He said it knows." Isor's voice shook. "What he feels." The old mage's face went gray. "That's beyond reason. The curse responds to the bloodline's magic, not to emotion. It's been documented for 12 generations. Has any king in those 12 generations ever—" Isor couldn't finish the sentence. "Ever what, child?" "Ever felt something. For someone." She forced the words out. "Truly felt something." Silence fell over the chamber. Aldrich sat back on his heels, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "The Ravenmore curse was cast by a scorned witch over 300 years ago," he said slowly. "King Vaemond I rejected her love, and in her fury, she cursed his entire line." "I know the history," Isor said impatiently. "What does that have to do with—" "The original curse wasn't meant to kill slowly." Aldrich's voice dropped. "It was meant to ensure that no king of Ravenmore could ever love. That if they ever began to feel genuine affection, genuine warmth for another soul—" He trailed off. "What?" Isor demanded. "The cold would consume them entirely." Calum's voice was barely audible, but his eyes had opened again, focused on her face. "That's the true curse, Isor. Not the winter killing my kingdom. That's just a side effect, my frozen heart spreading outward." Her mind reeled. A curse against love? Against feeling? His hand tightened on hers. "For 300 years, every king of Ravenmore has ruled with a frozen heart. Cold, distant, unable to form true attachments. The few who tried—" He coughed again, ice crystals flying from his lips. "My father tried to love my mother. He was dead within a year of their wedding." "But you're not dead," Isor said desperately. "You're still fighting." "Because I've spent my entire life building walls." His frozen gaze held hers, controlling every emotion, never allowing myself to feel anything that might trigger the curse. That's why I chose a marriage of political convenience with Ravenna. That's why I pushed everyone away. His voice cracked. "That's why I thought I could bring you here safely. I thought I could use you without feeling anything." The words hung unspoken between them. "You feel something," Isor breathed. "For me. I feel everything for you." The confession came out raw, broken. From the moment I touched your hand on that shore, I knew I was in danger. But I told myself it was just proximity, just the relief of your warmth. I told myself I could control it. His eyes fluttered closed. I was wrong. No. Isor pressed her palms against his chest, pouring every ounce of her inner warmth into him. You can't die for feeling something. That's not fair. That's not how this works. The curse doesn't care about fair. His breathing was growing shallower. It only cares about punishment. Then I'll break it. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I'll break the curse. That's why I'm here, isn't it? That's why you found me. Your magic is still bound. Then unbind it. Now. She turned to Aldrich, fire blazing in her eyes. You said it would take weeks to do it safely. What if we do it unsafely? What if we shatter the seal completely? You could die, Aldrich said flatly. The magical surge could kill you, kill everyone in this room, and possibly level the entire palace. And if we don't? The old mage looked down at his dying king. He has hours, perhaps less. Isor turned back to Kalum, her decision already made. I'm going to save you. You'll die trying. Maybe. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his frozen one. But I'd rather die trying than live knowing I let you go. His hand came up, trembling, to cup her cheek. Isor. Tell me the truth. Her voice was barely a whisper. Before I risk everything, I need to know what you feel for me. Is it real? For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Ice crackled across his cheeks. His lips moved without sound. Then, with what seemed like the last of his strength, he pulled her down and kissed her. It was cold, so cold it burned. But beneath the ice, beneath the frost, beneath the curse trying to devour him whole, she felt something else. Warmth. Not her warmth. His. Buried so deep it was almost extinguished, but still there. Still fighting. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something she'd never seen in them before. I love you, he breathed. I think I've loved you since I read the first report about a storm witch who sang to the sea. I just didn't know what the feeling was. I'd never felt it before. The ice spread faster. His eyes rolled back. His hand fell from her face. Kalum! Isor screamed. But he didn't respond. We need to unbind her magic now. Aldrich's voice cut through Isor's panic. It's the only chance. You said it could kill her, Seren protested from the doorway. Kill all of us. The king will be dead within the hour regardless. The old mage was already moving, pulling instruments from shelves, mixing compounds with trembling hands. At least, this way, there's a possibility. Isor hadn't moved from Kalum's side. His body had gone completely still, encased in ice so thick she could barely see his features beneath it. Only the faintest rise and fall of his chest told her he was still alive. Barely. Do it, she said. Whatever you need to do. Do it now. Aldrich approached with a crystal vial filled with something that glowed like captured lightning. This will dissolve the binding seal. The process will be unpleasant. Your magic has been compressed for 7 years. When it releases, it will feel like being struck by lightning from the inside. I don't care. You should. He pressed the vial into her hands. If you lose control, even for a moment, the resulting storm could destroy everything within miles. You must direct the energy immediately, channel it into the king, into breaking his curse. How do I do that? I don't know. For the first time, the old mage looked truly afraid. No one has ever attempted this before. You'll have to find your own way. Isor looked down at the vial. The liquid inside crackled and sparked, responding to her proximity. Her magic, concentrated and contained, waiting to explode. Leave, she said quietly. All of you. Get everyone out of the palace if you can. My lady. If this goes wrong, there's no reason for anyone else to die. She met Aldrich's gaze steadily. You've served him faithfully. Now let me try to save him. The mages exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they bowed and retreated. The door closed behind them. Isor was alone with her frozen king and the storm waiting to be born. She uncorked the vial. The scent hit her first. Ozone and copper and something electric that made every hair on her body stand on end. Her wolf howled inside her chest, recognizing what had been stolen, what was about to return. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, she whispered to Calem's frozen form. I'm sorry I didn't understand what I felt until it was almost too late. She lifted the vial to her lips and drank. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It felt like being torn apart from the inside, like every nerve in her body was being replaced with lightning. She screamed, the sound ripping from her throat as 7 years of compressed magic exploded through her veins. The room erupted. Wind howled out of nowhere, shattering windows, tearing tapestries from walls. Lightning crackled across her skin, leaping to nearby surfaces, scorching everything it touched. Thunder boomed so loud the floor shook beneath her. And through it all, the spiral brand on her shoulder blade burned like it was being carved anew. Control it, she gasped to herself. You have to control it. But how? She'd never been taught. Her magic had been bound before she could learn, sealed away by an uncle who wanted her power destroyed rather than developed. The storm inside her grew stronger, wilder. She could feel it pulling toward chaos, toward destruction, toward the raw entropy that was its nature. She was going to level the palace, kill everyone inside, prove every accusation ever leveled against her true. No. Isor forced her eyes open, forced herself to look at Calem, frozen and dying before her. She thought of his hand on her cheek, his voice in the darkness, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious rather than something cursed. You feel everything for you, he'd said, and she felt everything for him. The storm wanted chaos, wanted to destroy. But love wasn't chaos. Love was focus. Love was choosing one person, one moment, one purpose above all others. She chose him. Isor pressed her hands against Calem's frozen chest and pushed. Every ounce of lightning, every crack of thunder, and every howling wind inside her she channeled downward, inward, directly into the ice that encased him. The collision of fire and frost was cataclysmic. Steam exploded outward. The ice screamed as it melted, cracking and shattering and evaporating in great clouds of mist. And beneath it, she felt something else. The curse. It was old, ancient. A twisted thing of rage and heartbreak that had festered for 300 years. It fought back against her intrusion, wrapping tighter around Calem's heart, trying to squeeze the last warmth from his body. But Isor was a storm, and storms didn't negotiate. She poured everything she had into breaking it. Every memory of loneliness on the pale reach. Every moment of tenderness in his chambers. Every whispered confession in the darkness. She wove them together into a weapon of pure feeling and drove it directly into the curse's heart. Light exploded through the room, then silence. Isor collapsed forward onto Calem's chest, utterly spent. Her magic was empty. Her body was broken. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but lie there and listen. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then she felt it. A hand on her back. Weak, trembling, but warm. Warm. Isor. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but alive. What did you do? She started to cry. 3 weeks later, Isor stood in the great hall of Ashenmere Palace, watching the kingdom celebrate its rebirth. Outside, rain was falling. Real rain, warm and soft, the first the kingdom had seen in 3 years. The eternal winter had broken within hours of the curse shattering. Rivers thawed, snow melted, green shoots pushed through soil that had been frozen for years. Ravenmore was healing. So was its king. Caleb stood at the center of the hall, accepting congratulations from nobles and commoners alike. Color had returned to his cheeks. Warmth had returned to his skin. He smiled now, actually smiled, and the expression transformed his face into something almost unbearably beautiful. He kept looking for her in the crowd. Every few minutes, his gaze would sweep the room until he found her, and something would soften in his expression. She pretended not to notice. Things had been complicated since that night. The truth about her identity had emerged, unavoidable once witnesses reported a massive magical storm erupting from the king's chambers. The court now knew that Lady Varen was actually Isor of House Velmaris, convicted murderer and exiled storm witch. The reactions had been mixed. Lady Isor. She turned to find Lady Ravenna approaching, her expression carefully neutral. The betrothal had been formally dissolved a week ago. Caleb had offered generous compensation, estates and titles, and enough gold to ensure Ravenna would never want for anything. She'd accepted with grace that surprised everyone. Lady Ravenna, Isor replied cautiously. I wanted to say. The Omega paused, something flickering behind her careful mask. I was wrong about you. I thought you were here to steal something from me, but you saved something instead. She glanced toward Kalum. He's different now. Better. I didn't know he could be like this. He always could be. The curse just wouldn't let him. No, it's more than that. Ravenna's gaze returned to her. He chose you. Despite everything, despite what it cost him, he chose feeling something over, feeling nothing. A small, sad smile crossed her lips. I was his politically convenient option. You were his beyond reach option. I think I'm grateful, actually, that he was brave enough to reach for the unreachable. She swept away before Isor could respond. A commotion near the great doors drew her attention. Guards were escorting someone into the hall, someone in chains, struggling and shouting. Her uncle Morcant. Isor's blood went cold. Caleb had ordered an investigation into her original trial the moment he'd recovered. His best investigators had spent weeks digging through records, interviewing witnesses, following threads that had been deliberately buried years ago. They'd found the truth. Lord Morcant of House Velmaris, the herald announced, you stand accused of murder, conspiracy, and the deliberate framing of your niece for crimes she did not commit. The hall went silent. Morcant's face twisted with rage as he was dragged before the throne. This is absurd. The witch is a murderer. She killed Lord Brennan. She confessed. I never confessed, Isor heard herself say. Every eye turned to her. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years. Righteousness. I never confessed, she repeated, stepping forward. I said I didn't know what happened. I said my magic might have acted without my control. But I never confessed to murder because I never committed one. Lies, Morcant spat. You hated Brennan. You were jealous of your cousin. Everyone knew. Everyone knew what you told them. Caleb's voice cut through like a blade. But my investigators found witnesses you paid to stay silent. Servants who saw you entering Lord Brennan's chambers that night. A merchant who sold you black market lightning essence, enough to simulate a storm witch's attack. The color drained from Morcant's face. You killed Lord Brennan yourself, Caleb continued coldly, because he'd discovered you were embezzling from House Velmaris, because he threatened to expose you. And when you realized your niece's magic had manifested, you saw the perfect opportunity to eliminate 2 problems at once. You can't prove. We have your correspondence. Aldrich stepped forward, a bundle of letters in his hands. Hidden in your estate, detailing everything. Your hatred of your niece for inheriting the storm magic you always coveted. Your plot to destroy her. Your satisfaction when the court convicted her without question. Morcant lunged against his chains, snarling like a rabid wolf. She's an abomination. That magic should have been mine. My grandmother was the witch, not her worthless father. The power should have passed to me. Silence fell. Isor stared at her uncle, pieces finally clicking into place. That's why you hated me so much. Not because I was dangerous, because I had what you wanted. You had everything I wanted. Spittle flew from his lips. The magic, the inheritance, the future. And you didn't even appreciate it. Didn't even know how to use it. So I took it away. I took everything away, and I would do it again. You won't have the chance. Calum rose from his throne. Lord Morcan of House Velmaris, for the crimes of murder, conspiracy, and the deliberate persecution of an innocent woman, I sentence you to death. The execution will be carried out at dawn. And my cousin? Isor asked quietly, before the guards could drag Morcant away. Thessaly believed your lies. She testified against me. Morcant's face twisted with something that might have been satisfaction. Thessaly was a fool. Easy to manipulate. She actually believed you killed her precious Brennan out of jealousy. Then she was a victim of your deception as well, Calum said. He looked to Isor. We've already sent word to Lady Thessaly. She's been informed of her father's crimes. Whether reconciliation is possible? That will be for you to decide. Guards dragged the screaming man from the hall. Isor stood frozen, trembling, as 7 years of pain and injustice finally found resolution. Hands touched her shoulders, her back. Voices murmured condolences and congratulations, but she couldn't focus on any of it, until warm fingers found hers. She looked up to find Calum standing before her, his gray eyes soft with understanding. Without a word, he pulled her through the crowd, through a side door, into a private courtyard where rain still fell in gentle sheets. You're shaking, he said quietly. I didn't kill him. The words came out broken. I spent 7 years believing I might have, that my magic might have betrayed me. And I didn't. I didn't do it. You didn't do it. She fell into his arms and he held her while she sobbed, while 7 years of guilt and shame and loneliness poured out of her in the healing rain. When she finally lifted her head, his forehead pressed against hers. I love you, he said softly. I should have said it when I wasn't dying. I should have said it every day since then. I love you, Isor. The storm witch who saved my kingdom. The exile who warmed my frozen heart. The unreachable woman I broke every law to reach. I love you too. She laughed through her tears. The frozen king who found me when no one else was looking. Who saw something worth saving in a woman the world had already buried. He kissed her then, properly, without frost or fear or curses waiting to punish them. Just warmth. Just feeling. Just two broken people who had somehow made each other whole. When they finally pulled apart, the rain had stopped. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, the first pure sunlight Ravenmore had seen in years. Marry me, Calum said. Isor blinked. What? Marry me. Not for politics, not for convenience. Because I choose you. Because I will always choose you. Because spending the rest of my life with you is the only future I want. She should have hesitated, should have worried about what the court would say, what challenges lay ahead, what complications awaited a storm witch who became queen. Instead, she smiled. Yes. 6 months later, Isor stood in the same great hall, wearing a gown of silver and white, lightning-shaped jewels woven through her hair. The spiral brand on her shoulder was visible now, worn openly as a mark of survival rather than shame. Calum waited for her at the altar, his smile so warm it made her heart ache. The kingdom had transformed. Crops grew in fields that had been frozen wastelands. Rivers ran clear and strong. Pups played in streets that had once been silent with cold and hunger. And in the palace, a school for young witches was being built. Storm witches, fire witches, earth witches, any child with magic would be trained rather than feared, developed rather than destroyed. I pledge myself to you, Caleb said, sliding a ring onto her finger. My heart, my throne, my kingdom, everything I am is yours. I pledge myself to you, Isor replied. My storms, my lightning, my love against all odds, everything I am is yours. When he kissed her, the hall erupted in cheers. But she barely heard them. She was too busy feeling everything she'd been denied for 7 years. Joy, belonging, home. After the ceremony, they stood together on the palace balcony, watching the sunset paint the healed kingdom in shades of gold and rose. I used to guard a forbidden shore alone, Isor said softly. I thought that would be my entire life. Exile, solitude, waiting to be forgotten. Caleb pulled her closer. And now? She smiled up at him. This man who had broken his own laws to reach her, who had risked everything on a hope that seemed beyond reach. Now I guard something else, she said. A kingdom. A king. A love that should have been unattainable. He kissed her forehead. Nothing is unattainable. I proved that when I found you. The sun sank below the horizon. The first stars emerged in a sky that was finally clear. And the storm witch, who had guarded the forbidden shore alone, discovered that the best endings weren't endings at all. They were beginnings. The pale reach was where you went when the world wanted to forget you existed. And for 7 years, Isor had walked its cursed sands alone, the last guardian of a shore no living soul was permitted to touch. She had stopped counting the sunrises. She had stopped hoping anyone would come. Then the Alpha King arrived. Caleb of Ravenmore, cold as the eternal winter slowly choking his kingdom to death, walked across the forbidden boundary without hesitation and stopped directly before her. Come with me, he said. He broke every law to reach her. She broke every curse to save him. And in the end, they discovered that the walls they'd built to protect themselves were the very things keeping them from living. Some shores are forbidden for a reason. Some kings are frozen for a purpose. But some love stories are strong enough to shatter every boundary, melt every barrier, and prove that even the most unthinkable endings can become beautiful beginnings. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and would like to support the channel, hit the subscribe button. Let me know what you thought in the comments. I always read them, and they mean more than you know.